Hey guys, it's Madison, and I cannot believe that it's already December, but here we are at the end of 2021. I've decided at the very end of the year I'm going to be posting a video of me speaking all of my current target languages, which are Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. I've always kind of had a fear of posting myself speaking another language on the internet just because it just seems like an invitation for judgment, but I've decided that it'll also be a good way for me to kind of be able to track where I am throughout the months and years. So I've decided to do that, and Korean and Chinese really shouldn't be much of a problem, but Japanese is still very baby stage, so I really should probably work on Japanese some more this month so that I have something to show at the end of this year. But before I get too much into my goals for December and the rest of this year, I wanted to briefly just kind of recap what I did during November. November was a pretty busy month for me in terms of just my job, and I was also kind of sick for a lot of the time, so it was difficult for me to get a lot of active things done, but I had set my goal at the beginning of the month to be kind of focused on getting input in my different languages. Originally my goal was to especially get input in Japanese, since that's my weakest language and it takes a lot of, input to, for your brain to kind of get used to a new language and, words and how they turn into sentences. But I didn't actually end up getting a lot of Japanese input during the month, but I did end up getting a ton of Chinese input, kind of unintentionally. In the month before, I had kind of prioritized just Korean and Japanese, and when I decided to introduce Chinese again this month, I didn't really expect it to kind of take over my input the way it did, but that's what ended up happening. This month I used a notebook to kind of just write down what I did each day, and I color-coded it based on the 3 different languages that I have. And when I went back at the end of the month and added up all of the time that I spent listening to podcasts or watching shows or watching the news, stuff like that, I was really surprised to find that Chinese dominated that category. Well, I wasn't surprised because I knew I had watched a lot of things, but according to my calculations, I watched 53 and a half hours of Chinese input this past month. So wow, that was definitely the most out of all 3 languages. I don't know, Chinese dramas, when I first watched dramas from mainland China, a lot of them are overdubbed, still in Chinese, but with, I don't know, they add the actors' voices dubbed in post. When I first started watching dramas, I really didn't like that, but I don't know, I feel like kind of a lot of dramas in general are very predictable, and that applies to Korean dramas too, which I also love. The dubbing just adds that extra layer of feeling like it's very predictable and cheesy, I guess. But at the same time, that also makes, first of all, the voice is very crisp because, they're not as polluted by outside background noises. But also, I don't know, you get kind of lulled into having, this sound happening in the background of dubbed Chinese voices, which, I don't know, they're very addictive, even though they're not, necessarily the highest quality of shows. Sticking with Chinese, I also added Chinese to my Duolingo regimen for now. I'm not sure I'm going to keep it up as much as I've been doing it. I've been doing a couple of rounds of Chinese exercises on Duolingo a day. I think it's decent for character review, but I don't know if the time it takes to complete a lesson is worth necessarily the amount of characters that you see in a lesson. I don't know if I explained that well, but I feel like there are other apps that are better, so I'm not sure if I'll stick with Duolingo for Chinese specifically, or if I'll limit that or eliminate that and move over to other apps like Do Chinese. I also kind of got into using Do Chinese this month, and I didn't realize all the features that it had when I first downloaded it a long time ago. Do Chinese is an app where you can read basically little Chinese stories or conversations or articles according to your level. And a really nice thing about it is, as you're reading, if you just tap on a character, its pinyin and meaning will pop up at the top of the screen. And that's really helpful for reading Chinese because, you can't sound out words if you don't know a character, you kind of have to guess. So being able to just kind of read, and whenever you don't know a word, just easily tap and see what it means and continue reading is really great. And then also I didn't realize that you could save words, and there's like a built-in like SRS kind of system in the app. So you can save words that you encounter in the readings and right in the app have them on a spaced repetition review system. So I think that's pretty good, and I do want to incorporate that more into the coming months because I think it's a really good way to keep exposing yourself to Chinese, seeing it in like more natural context than Duolingo, which isn't hard to accomplish, but it is definitely more natural than that. And just kind of increase my exposure to not only drama Chinese, but also written Chinese through these articles. Moving on to Japanese, I had originally planned, like I said, to make this kind of my focus language for this past month, but that didn't happen for sure. I did continue to do Duolingo with Japanese, and I am liking Duolingo more for Japanese compared to Chinese so far. I think part of the reason is that where I'm currently placed in Japanese is more accurately like slightly above my level of knowledge, whereas Chinese placed me at a place where I knew 95% of what was in the Duolingo lessons, which made it kind of a waste of time in that aspect as well, even though there would be a couple words that I wasn't as familiar with. I think I'll stick with using Duolingo for Japanese for the time being. I also want to start using the stories that are I think pretty new to Duolingo for Japanese. I didn't really do any Japanese reading this month. I did get through one chapter, like one unit of Irodori, which is a good textbook that I like online for free. And I want to continue to use that to study in the upcoming month. And then I also did watch one anime. Like I said in the last video, I am not an anime person in general. Just the idea and what I've seen of a lot of it doesn't really appeal to me. But somebody commented on my last video recommending an anime called The Promised Neverland. And I was like, I'll give it a shot since it was recommended. And I was grading papers one night and I was just so tired of grading. So I was like, oh, I'll just take a break and watch one episode of this anime. And so I watched the first episode and I was like, okay, that was actually kind of interesting and creepy. And so then I kept grading and I was like, I'll watch one more as a break. And that night I ended up binge watching the entire thing and staying up till like 4 a.m. watching it. If you haven't seen The Promised Neverland, I'm not going to spoil it. The plot is not typically what I like, the kind of things that I necessarily search out. I'm not really into like creepy stuff generally, but it made it very interesting to consider, even though it was a very unrealistic situation, like if that situation were to happen, could this even possibly be feasible? I don't think it would be, but it was interesting. Of course, then I didn't watch anything else for the rest of the month. I believe I had another viewer recommend something else to me as well, so I might give that a shot in the upcoming months. And again, if you have an anime that you find interesting or want to recommend, I am looking for recommendations, as well as just normal dramas like real life, not animation or cartoon stuff is more my typical content that I consume. If you know any like Japanese dramas that you find good or interesting, let me know so I can watch them and get more Japanese exposure because I desperately need it. But yeah, that was pretty much all I did for Japanese this month. I kind of stopped reading the articles, like the news articles that I had been reading the previous month, and I kind of want to get back into that this next month. So I just did kind of Duolingo, a chapter of the Irodori textbook, and that one anime. And if you're wondering, that anime comprised of 4 hours of content. So I got 4 hours of input compared to 53.5 hours of Mandarin input. A little bit of a difference there. And then Korean, at the beginning of the month, I was really good about kind of diversifying what I was listening to. I was kind of mixing up news into my listening regimen, which is kind of what I had hoped to do more of this month. But I ended up only watching 3 news broadcasts. They were each in about an hour, so 3 hours of news stuff. I also occasionally would listen to a crime podcast, which I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. I've talked about it before in my videos here, but it's interesting. It's definitely above my level, so I have to like really pay attention to kind of follow what's happening. I know the gist of what's happening, but there are a lot of words that I'm unfamiliar with in the crime detective sphere. So I also want to kind of increase my intake of that, and then I also want to kind of work on some sort of method to not only listen to it, but figure out a way to spend more time actually trying to learn those vocabulary. I haven't figured out a good method to do that because there's no transcripts. So I'm still thinking about how to do that, but I'd like to kind of use those podcasts more actively beyond just listen to them while I'm driving. Beyond the news broadcasts and podcasts, I also listen to or watch a couple of episodes of different dramas throughout the month. I'm pretty much always watching some sort of drama as they air. And so total with the news, the podcasts, and the drama stuff, I got 21.5 hours of Korean listening input this past month. At the beginning of the month, like I said, when I was kind of doing more of a variety of different things, I also continued to read Ommaru Potake. I think I read, I only read it on 3 different days, which is a lot less than I was aiming for, but I did spend around half an hour on those 3 days reading, and I definitely want to read more this upcoming month. I also was writing quite a few of journal entries at the beginning of the month. I wrote actually 7 journal entries in the first 9 days of the month, and then I didn't write any more after that. So I do want to get back in the habit. I had a pretty good habit going for the first third of the month, but you can see as I got kind of busier and sick, I kind of dropped that and didn't do it anymore. And then I also finished the My Daily Routine in Korean book, which I had been hoping to do. I have thoughts on this, but I'm going to save it for its own review. So you can hear more about that later, but I did finish that book, which was nice. I'll probably move on to more of the books that I've been hoping to kind of get through in the next month. But yeah, if you do add up all of just the like listening or watching input that I got from all 3 of my languages, it adds up to 79 hours. Yeah, I am pretty happy overall that I managed to stick to my goals of trying to get more input and get more comfortable in those languages. And I can definitely tell that, you know, those 53.5 hours of Mandarin input have definitely helped Mandarin be more on the brain, which is also nice. And as I continue to kind of more actively study Mandarin through the Do Chinese app, I think the input will be really helpful so that when I encounter characters, I can be like, oh, that's how you write that word that I already know because I've heard it in dramas, versus, oh, this is a new character and a new word that I need to learn like from the beginning. So yeah, that was last month. I spent a lot more time talking about it than I had planned to originally, but moving on to the rest of this year in December, what I hope to do, now that I'm kind of in the habit of watching stuff, apparently especially Chinese dramas, I think I can kind of step away from prioritizing that, because now that I'm in the habit of kind of turning things on, I think that'll continue. But I want to kind of shift my priority to reading. I saw on Twitter someone's making kind of a reading challenge to either finish or read an entire book in the month of December. I don't remember what the hashtag was exactly, but I'll put it down here so that you can go check it out if you'd like to. But I think I'm going to be doing that. I'm probably going to set my goal for just finishing this book since I haven't finished it yet. Part of me wants to be like insane and be like, I want to read this one and the next book as well. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be more realistic and just set my goal to finish this novel by the end of the month. And I also want to focus on reading more in both Japanese and Chinese with the Do Chinese app and those little articles, and then Japanese, either going through that textbook, which will, you know, incorporate some reading as well, or looking up those beginner news articles as well. Just kind of anything to get more like reading exposure during this month. And then I do want to continue for Japanese specifically to keep searching out input, because that is what I need the most at this point in time. I'm really hoping to get a lot more active kind of studying done this month, as opposed to just consuming content like while I'm getting ready or cooking, that kind of stuff. Because actively studying a lot while you're also getting lots of input in your free time is what really helps your brain kind of get used to a new language and internalize it and get better in it. So that's the goal. And like I said at the beginning, I am planning on making a video where I speak all 3 of my languages. I'm already nervous and it's not even time to do it yet, but hopefully that'll be a motivating factor for me to actually study, especially Japanese, getting more input and studying more so that I can, you know, say more than just a couple of sentences describing my Japanese learning so far. But yeah, that was my past month of studying along with my goals for the next month. And yeah, hopefully I can make lots of time to study over the holiday season after the last week of crazy finals and grading that I have to do for my university job. But after that, I'm hoping to have lots and lots of time to do all the things. So we'll see how that goes, and until next time, annyeong.